chilling drizzle slicked the polished marble of the central avenue. The cold seeped into everything. Helena huddled closer to her 5-year-old daughter, Isabella, whose small hand was wrapped tight around her mother's. The dampness had soaked through the threadbare fibers of their clothing, leaving Helena perpetually shivering. Her tattered, mud-stained layers spoke volumes of her 2 months sleeping rough, ever since the job loss led to her eviction. Her worn, leaking shoes squelched with every step, letting the icy street water sting her feet. They slept in crowded shelters when a bed was available, or under the meager overhang of closed shops when there was no other choice. Yet, none of that crushing reality mattered when Helena looked down at Isabella's wide brown eyes, her singular, fragile reason for enduring. That afternoon, however, fate was about to take a sharp, unexpected turn, though Helena couldn't know it yet. She was merely looking for a dry spot when she paused in front of a high-end luxury boutique, desperate to shield her child from the rain that had begun to fall harder. It was in that miserable moment that everything began. 3 women swept out of the boutique, their arms laden with shopping bags bearing expensive logos, their handbags costing more than Helena earned in a year. The first was Patricia, 42 years old, her hair a perfect mahogany cascade, her scarlet designer dress screaming wealth and privilege. Flanking her were Fernanda and Claudia, both draped in recognizable couture and dazzling jewelry that caught the weak street light. They stopped abruptly upon seeing Helena and Isabella. Patricia's gaze was one of immediate, undisguised revulsion, as though she had stumbled upon something vile on the pavement. And then, the nightmare Helena would never forget began its slow, painful unfolding. "Look what we have here," Patricia declared loudly, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "A beggar dirtying the entrance to our favorite store." Fernanda offered a high, cruel laugh, a sound that made Isabella instinctively clutch her mother's leg even tighter. "She looks like she just crawled out of the trash," Patricia continued, gesturing with fingers heavy with gold rings. "Actually, she probably did. Filthy." Helena felt a furious blush spread across her cheeks, a heat of absolute humiliation, but she locked her jaw and kept her head high, pulling Isabella closer into the shelter of her body. She knew this type of woman well. She had worked for people just like them before. She knew that often, the more money they possessed, the less basic human empathy they seemed to retain. "Does she realize she's frightening away potential customers?" Claudia asked, her tone dripping with cultivated concern. "She should be ashamed to look like that, especially with that child. What kind of example is she setting? Teaching her to be a failure just like her mother?" The words were not mere insults. They were small, precise knives slicing deep into Helena's fragile composure. Tears burned fiercely behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not in front of Isabella, who was already trembling with fear. The little girl didn't fully comprehend the venom, but she knew those women were deliberately hurting her mother. Helena opened her mouth, intending to defend herself, to lash back, but the words choked in her throat. A crowd began to gather, forming a tight circle of rubberneckers, many pulling out cell phones to film the spectacle. Some snickered, others simply watched, uncomfortable but immobile. Yet not a single soul stepped forward to help. Patricia sensed the power of her impromptu audience and pressed her advantage. "I bet she doesn't even know who the father is. Does she? Probably some drunk who was too far gone to notice who he was sleeping with." Fernanda and Claudia burst into raucous laughter. Helena felt something essential snap inside her, the last vestige of a hope that people, deep down, might be inherently good. That part of her died on the wet sidewalk. If you enjoy emotional stories that show how life can change in an instant, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. You won't want to miss what happens next. Isabella finally broke. She started to cry, loud, desperate, gasping sobs that echoed in the sudden quiet. "Mommy, let's go, please," the girl begged, tugging fiercely at Helena's hand. "They are being mean. Please, let's go." The sound of the child's distress caused a few people in the crowd to lower their phones, a flicker of self-awareness momentarily cutting through their morbid curiosity. But Patricia was unstoppable. She took a step forward, so close that Helena could smell the intoxicating, expensive perfume Patricia wore. "Look at me when I'm talking," Patricia commanded. "People like you shouldn't have children. You can't afford it. You should hand that girl over to someone who can give her a decent life." Those words were the final breaking point. Rage, pure and blistering, exploded through Helena, displacing all her shame and fear. She lifted her face, meeting Patricia's condescending eyes directly. "You know nothing about me," Helena said, her voice steadier and firmer than she expected. "You don't know what I have been through, or why I am here, and you absolutely have no right to judge my love for my daughter. I may be homeless, I may be broke, but I will never be without love to give. That is something all your money will never buy." The resulting silence was deafening, the air thick with shock. Patricia opened her mouth, ready to unleash a furious retort, when a sleek black car pulled up abruptly next to the curb. The doors swung open and 3 men in impeccably tailored suits emerged, scanning the scene with expressions of stony seriousness. And then he stepped out. Dante Morera, 38 years old, possessed a presence so potent it commanded people to instinctively back away. Tall, broad-shouldered, and striking, his face was defined by a pale scar that sliced through his right eyebrow. He didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. His very stillness amplified his authority. His dark eyes rapidly swept the scene. The 3 affluent women, the thin woman fiercely shielding her daughter, the filming crowd. Dante recognized cruelty when he saw it, but something about the broken woman in ragged clothes captivated his attention in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way she held her head high despite being shattered, or the fierce, protective love shining in her eyes as she looked at her child. Dante felt a tremor in his chest, a sensation he thought had died long ago. He walked toward the group, his measured steps forcing the crowd to part. His men followed in a tight formation, hands tucked inside their suit jackets where sidearms were undoubtedly carried. Patricia spun around and instantly paled, the color draining from her face. She recognized Dante Morera immediately. Everyone knew that man, or at least his terrifying reputation. He was the reigning power, the head of the region's most formidable organization, controlling legitimate and illicit businesses with an iron fist. He was someone you absolutely never crossed. Patricia's blood froze when she realized he was walking directly toward them. But then, a dawning horror washed over her. He wasn't walking toward her. He was walking toward the miserable woman she had just humiliated. Dante stopped directly in front of Helena, completely ignoring the 3 trembling women. He looked at her for a long moment, studying her tired, rain-streaked, but still beautiful face. "What is your name?" he asked. His voice was deep and surprisingly soft, completely unlike the menacing tone they had anticipated. Helena blinked, confused by the sudden, radical shift in atmosphere. "Helena," she answered quietly, instinctively pulling Isabella further behind her, protecting her daughter even from the sudden intervention. "And hers?" Dante asked, nodding toward the little girl. "Isabella," Helena said, her voice laced with fear. "Please, we don't want trouble. We were just trying to get out of the rain." Dante turned his gaze back to Patricia and her friends, who were frozen rigid with terror. He knew women like this, people who used their wealth as a shield for their internal emptiness. "So, you 3 were the ones humiliating this woman and her daughter?" he asked, his voice low but carrying a chilling, veiled threat that made Patricia visibly recoil. We just..." she began, but Dante cut her off with an icy stare. "You think having money grants you the right to treat people like trash? You think expensive clothes make you superior?" The silence was absolute. Even the crowd seemed to stop breathing. Claudia tried to speak, but her voice came out as a desperate squeak. "Mr. Morera, we didn't know. We didn't mean to offend anyone important." "Important?" Dante repeated, his voice dangerously rising. "So, if she weren't important to me, it would be fine to continue the humiliation? Is that how it works?" The 3 women shook their heads frantically, tears mingling with Patricia's expensive makeup. Fernanda was trembling so hard, she dropped one of her shopping bags, the pricey contents spilling onto the wet sidewalk. Dante turned his attention back to Helena, who watched him with a mixture of fear and profound confusion. She couldn't fathom why this clearly dangerous man was defending her and Isabella, and she was certainly unprepared for what he was about to do next. Dante took a slow step forward, closing the distance until they were only inches apart. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he also saw the core strength that refused to shatter completely. "May I?" he asked softly, slowly raising his hand toward her face. Helena didn't know what he was asking permission for, but something in those dark, intense eyes compelled her to trust him. She nodded slightly, barely breathing. Dante gently placed his hand on her cheek. Her skin was cold and wet, and he could feel her slight tremor. "Forgive me for this," he murmured in a voice only Helena could hear. And then, before the stunned crowd, the three horrified women, and dozens of recording cell phones, Dante Moreira lowered his head and kissed Helena. It wasn't a simple kiss. It was deep, possessive, and charged with a fierce passion that caught Helena utterly off guard. For a moment, she was paralyzed, her mind unable to process the audacity of the act. But then something deep within her yielded. Years of pain and crushing loneliness seemed to melt away under the heat of that unexpected connection. She allowed herself, just for that moment, to feel what it was like to be desired, to be valued, to be seen as something more than street detritus. When Dante finally drew back, Helena was breathless, her cheeks flushed, her eyes wide with shock. The crowd erupted into murmurs, phones capturing every second. Patricia looked as though she might faint, her complexion shifting rapidly between chalk white and purple fury. Dante kept his hand resting gently on Helena's face for another moment before turning to his guard detail. "Marco," he commanded, "take Helena and Isabella to my car. Ensure they are comfortable and warm." Marco nodded and cautiously approached Helena, extending a gentle hand. "Madam, please come with me." Helena looked back at Dante, still trying to process the meaning of that kiss, wondering why a man like him would help someone like her. But before she could speak, Isabella tugged on her hand. "Mommy, I'm cold," the girl said, shivering noticeably. "Can we go now? He seems nice." Helena swallowed hard and nodded, allowing Marco to guide them away. As the car door closed, cutting off the sound of the rain and the gaping crowd, Helena finally allowed herself to weep, silent, cleansing tears streaming down her face as Isabella snuggled against her on the soft leather seat. Outside, Dante turned to face the three women, who were now huddled together as if for protection. He took 2 slow steps toward them, every movement calculated to maximize their fear. "Do you have anything to say?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Patricia instantly dropped to her knees on the wet sidewalk, staining her expensive attire. "Mr. Moreira, please forgive us," she pleaded, her voice broken. "We didn't know. It was a terrible mistake. We will never do anything like this again." Fernanda and Claudia swiftly joined her on the ground, all three kneeling before him like terrified supplicants, begging for clemency. The remaining crowd watched in absolute, stunned silence. Dante stared down at them without a flicker of compassion. "You don't regret what you did," he stated plainly. "You regret that you were caught, and that you chose the wrong person to humiliate. If I hadn't been here, you would have continued, wouldn't you?" The three women started to protest, but Dante raised a hand, and they instantly fell silent. "I don't want your pathetic excuses. I want you to understand one thing very clearly. That woman and that child are now under my personal protection. If any of you or anyone in this city dares to look at them the wrong way, dares to treat them with anything less than absolute respect, you will answer directly to me." He let the chilling threat sink in. "And believe me, you do not want that." The video spread through the city like wildfire. Dante ordered his men to confiscate the cell phones that had filmed the initial humiliation, but he deliberately allowed the recordings of the kiss and his defense to circulate. Within hours, the video was everywhere on social media, racking up millions of views, showing the feared Dante Moreira kissing a homeless woman. Comments ranged from shocked and romantic to openly terrified. Some dismissed it as a staged stunt, others speculated Dante had gone insane, but most recognized the powerful truth. A powerful man was using his immense authority to protect someone utterly defenseless. And for those who knew Dante, that moment signaled a definitive shift in the nature of his power. Inside the car, Helena held Isabella close as the heater finally began to warm their chilled bodies. The girl had stopped crying and was now looking around with wide eyes, touching the smooth leather of the seat as if it were the most incredible thing she had ever encountered. "Mommy," she whispered, "is the man who kissed you your boyfriend now?" Helena couldn't stop a shaky laugh at the innocent logic. "No, darling," she replied, smoothing her daughter's damp hair. "He was just kind. Very kind. But why did he kiss you then?" Isabella insisted, her childish logic demanding an answer. "People only kiss when they like each other." Helena had no answer, because she herself did not understand why that intimidating man had kissed her, or why her heart was still hammering wildly in her chest, thinking about the feel of his lips. The car door opened and Dante slid in, closing it with a soft click. He looked at Helena and Isabella, noting how the little girl instantly recoiled slightly, childish instincts recognizing danger even when wrapped in kindness. "You don't need to be afraid of me," Dante said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he addressed the child. "I won't hurt you or your mother. In fact, I came to offer you help." He turned to Helena, who watched him with cautious intensity. "I know you don't know me, and you have no reason to trust me," he began, choosing his words carefully. "But I want to help you and your daughter. I have an empty apartment in one of my buildings, fully furnished. You can stay for as long as you need, no conditions, no obligations. Just a safe place." Helena felt her throat constrict with emotion. Part of her wanted to accept immediately, to grasp this lifeline and never let go. But the part that had learned to distrust everything and everyone, especially powerful men offering help for free, hesitated fiercely. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? We don't even know each other." Dante was silent for a long, heavy moment. "Because I saw you out there," he said finally, "maintaining your dignity even when the entire world tried to tear you down. I saw how you protected your daughter, how you held your head up even when you were broken, and it reminded me of someone important to me a long time ago. Someone who was also treated like trash by people who thought they were better. I couldn't help that person then, but I can help you now." There was a raw truth in his words that made Helena believe him, or at least desperately want to believe him. She looked down at Isabella, who was watching her with big, trusting eyes, waiting for her mother to make the right decision. Helena realized she wasn't just deciding for herself. She was deciding for her daughter's future, for the chance to give her a better life, a warm bed, and proper food. "All right," she said at last, her voice trembling slightly. "We accept your help, but I need you to know. I cannot pay rent right now. I have no money for anything. I will need time to find work." Dante shook his head slowly. "I don't want your money, Helena. I want you and Isabella to have a secure place. We will solve the rest later." The apartment was located in an upscale district, a 15-story building with round-the-clock security. When Marco opened the door and flipped on the lights, Helena had to fight back a fresh wave of tears. The apartment was magnificent, featuring 2 large bedrooms, a spacious living room with couches that looked like clouds, and a modern kitchen fully stocked with new appliances. It was more beautiful than any place she had ever lived. Isabella pulled free of her mother's hand and ran inside, her eyes sparkling as she explored every corner. "Nami, look, we have a huge television," she shouted from the bedroom. "And a real bed. Can I sleep in a real bed tonight?" Helena turned to face Dante, who stood quietly in the doorway, observing the scene. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her words fractured by overwhelming emotion. "You have no idea what this means. You didn't need to do all this." Dante stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "I had to," he responded simply. "And to be honest, I think I didn't just do it for you. I did it for myself too. I've lived in a world of violence and betrayal for so long that I forgot what it was like to do something good without expecting anything in return. You reminded me of that today. You reminded me that there is still some goodness in the world, even in the most unlikely places." He walked into the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, which was already stocked with fresh food. Marco made sure you have everything you need. Food, clothes in the closets, toiletries. If you need anything at all, my number is on the living room table. Helena followed him into the kitchen, still trying to process the events of the last few hours. One question burned in her mind, something she needed to know before he left. That kiss, she began cautiously. Why did you do that? Was it just to humiliate those women? Or was there something more? Dante paused and turned to face her. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. The tension in the air so thick Helena felt it tightening in her chest. When I saw you out there, he said slowly, being humiliated but still holding on to your strength. Something inside me reacted. I can't quite explain it. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated, it was instinctive. And yes, I wanted to show those women who you were to me from that moment forward. But I also did it because I desired to. Because I looked at you and I saw beauty, where they only saw misery. Helena's heart thumped faster in her chest. She knew she should be afraid of this man, maintain her distance, recognizing that men like him were dangerous. But all she felt was a magnetic attraction that defied sense. An impossible, undeniable connection. You barely know me, she whispered. Do you know nothing about me beyond what you saw today? Then tell me, Dante replied, taking one step closer. Tell me who you were before everything fell apart. Tell me your story, Helena. I want to know the woman behind the tired eyes and the torn clothes. I want to know what brought you to that moment on the street. And Helena, for the first time in months, felt the urge to trust someone, to share the crushing burden she had carried alone for so long. They sat down in the living room, and while Isabella happily explored her new room, Helena began her story. She spoke about the husband who abandoned her when he discovered she was pregnant, leaving her alone and unsupported. She recounted how she worked 3 jobs to support her daughter, sleeping only 4 hours a night, but always ensuring Isabella had everything she needed. She spoke about the illness that forced her off work for 2 months, how she lost all her jobs due to absences, and how her meager savings vanished into medical bills. She told him about the eviction, about trying to ask her family for help only to be rejected and branded a shame, and the 2 terrifying months on the streets, sheltering Isabella with her own body. Each word was an open wound, yet it was also liberating to finally speak it all to someone who truly seemed to listen. Dante remained silent throughout her narrative, his eyes never leaving her face, absorbing every painful detail. When she finally finished, tears tracing clean paths down her cheeks, he reached out and gently wiped them away. You are the strongest person I have ever met, he said with absolute sincerity. Most people would have given up, would have surrendered to despair. But you kept fighting, you kept protecting your daughter, you kept being human, even when the world tried to strip that away from you. That is rare, Helena, rarer than you realize. He hesitated before continuing. My mother was like you, a fierce woman who did the impossible to protect me. She died when I was 16, and I've never forgiven the world for being so cruel to her. Perhaps that is why I felt such a connection to you today. The weeks that followed were a strange mixture of fragile normalcy and escalating tension. Helena settled into the apartment with Isabella, who flourished in the safe, comfortable environment. The girl began to smile more, playing as a 5-year-old should, free from the constant weight of worry. Helena found work at a nearby bakery. The owner agreed to hire her after Dante personally vouched for her character. It wasn't a dream job, but it was honest, it paid the bills, and it restored her dignity of earning her own way. Every night, as she tucked Isabella into a soft bed, Helena gave thanks for the second chance. But there was something else growing inside her, something she couldn't ignore. Dante appeared regularly at the apartment, always with some excuse. He brought toys for Isabella, who quickly grew fond of him, calling him Uncle Dante. He brought dinner when Helena worked late. Sometimes he just showed up to talk, sitting in the living room and discussing trivial things. With every visit, the unspoken tension between him and Helena escalated, an unacknowledged attraction that hung in the air like electricity. They would touch accidentally, and both felt the undeniable spark, a desire as inappropriate as it was inevitable. Helena tried to convince herself it was merely gratitude, but she knew it was much more. What do you think? Should Helena allow herself to develop feelings for Dante? Or would it be too dangerous to get involved with a man from his world? Leave your opinion in the comments. One evening, after Isabella had fallen asleep, Dante and Helena stood on the balcony, gazing at the city lights spread out below. There was something different about that night, an intensity in the atmosphere that both could sense. Helena finally broke the heavy silence. "Why do you keep coming here?" she asked softly. "You have done so much, more than anyone else would. You don't need to keep checking if we're all right." Dante was silent for so long that Helena thought he wouldn't answer. Then he turned toward her. "I come because I want to be near you," he said with brutal honesty. "Because every day I spend without seeing you felt fundamentally incomplete." "I know this makes no sense," she whispered, her voice tight with disbelief. "I know our situation is impossible, complicated beyond repair, but I can't seem to stay away." Helena felt a powerful surge. Her heart hammered against her ribs, blood rushing with startling speed through her veins. Every logical instinct screamed at her to retreat, to put necessary, protective distance between them before this went too far, before she lost control entirely. Instead, driven by an invisible gravitational force, she did the opposite. She took one deliberate step forward, eliminating the space until their bodies were separated only by the sheer force of the air they were breathing. "You terrify me," she confessed, the words barely audible. "And it's not because I fear you will physically harm me. It's because when I am this close to you, I feel things I have no right feeling. I feel like I am betraying every single thing I fought so hard to build. My independence, my hard-won self-sufficiency. I feel myself falling, Dante, for a man who exists in a world utterly foreign to mine." Dante slowly raised his hand, his movements deliberate, and gently traced the line of her cheekbone with a tenderness that was a startling contrast to his rugged, uncompromising appearance. "Perhaps our worlds are more alike than you believe, Helena," he murmured, his thumb brushing away a stray tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "We both have seen the very worst humanity has to offer. We both have survived things that should have utterly destroyed us. Maybe that is precisely why we understand each other so well." And then he kissed her again. But this time it bore no resemblance to the public spectacle on the street. There was no surrounding crowd, no pretense, no performance for anyone else's benefit. It was only the two of them, two profoundly damaged souls finding unexpected solace and profound recognition in the shelter of the other's embrace. Helena surrendered herself entirely to that kiss with an intense, raw passion she never knew existed within her, her arms winding tightly around his neck as he pulled her flush against his formidable chest. They kissed until they were both breathless, until the world outside the apartment walls dissolved into irrelevance, and only that singular, perfect moment remained. When they finally broke apart, both of them were visibly trembling, their eyes searching the others for silent confirmation that this fierce intensity was real, that they hadn't imagined the seismic shift of emotion that had just occurred. In the days that followed, their relationship swiftly morphed from cautious friendship and guarded respect into something infinitely deeper and more dangerously profound. Dante still maintained the secretive structure of his criminal life, leaving for meetings she knew better than to inquire about, sometimes returning with fresh bruises that he would dismiss with a casual wave as accidents. Helena was far from naive. She understood exactly who and what he was in the eyes of the city, yet she saw the quiet, protective man beneath that fearsome reputation, the man who played with Isabella, making absurd voices, the man who provided quiet assurance during her daughter's darkest nightmares. She knew she was hopelessly falling in love with him. She had crossed the point of no return, knowing her heart now belonged to a dangerous man. But the knowledge didn't possess the power to make her pull away. One crisp morning, Helena found the envelope resting conspicuously on the kitchen table. Inside were legal documents transferring the full ownership of the apartment to her name, paid off entirely. There was also a single handwritten letter. It read, "Helena, this place is yours now, not as a gift from me, but as a recognition of everything you have achieved here. You have transformed this apartment into a true home. You have given Isabella the stable childhood she deserves, and you rebuilt your life from absolutely nothing. This is all yours." You owe me nothing, you never have. All I did was have the privilege of witnessing your incredible strength and courage. With all my love, Dante. Helena read the short note 3 times, tears blurring the ink before she finally understood the weight of the gesture. He wasn't trying to manipulate her or bind her. He was deliberately giving her the ultimate freedom. That profound action shattered the final, carefully constructed walls Helena had built around her heart. She realized Dante was utterly unlike the other men she had known, men who viewed kindness and tenderness as inherent weaknesses. He was different, forged in a brutal world, yet upholding a fierce code of honor that few privileged people possessed. That night, when he arrived for dinner, Helena made no mention of the transfer documents. Instead, after Isabella was tucked in and asleep, she simply took his large hand in hers and led him silently into her bedroom. What followed was far more than a physical act. It was 2 people finally allowing themselves to be completely vulnerable with one another. 2 souls finding a desperate connection in the darkness and deciding that what they shared was worth fighting for, no matter how unlikely or complicated the world decreed it to be. The 3 women who had humiliated Helena did not meet a gentle fate. Patricia tragically lost her once thriving business after key, high-paying clients discovered the true, ugly nature of the person she was. The viral video became a social media firestorm, destroying her carefully manicured reputation in a matter of days. Claudia was abandoned by her wealthy husband, who decided his public image was too valuable to be associated with her brand of petty cruelty. Fernanda was summarily fired, her behavior deemed incompatible with the firm's supposed corporate values of respect and integrity. The 3 of them fell hard from their pedestals of entrenched privilege, experiencing for the first time what it felt like to be harshly judged, stripped bare, and publicly rejected. And while Helena had never actively sought revenge, she couldn't deny a certain, quiet satisfaction in knowing that actions, eventually, had profound consequences, even for the untouchable rich. But Dante's past was an inescapable shadow, and it eventually reached out for them. A rival organization, sensing an opportunity, identified his relationship with Helena as a serious weakness, a guaranteed way to strike him where he was most vulnerable. They began threatening Helena and Isabella, leaving explicit, terrifying messages detailing what they would do if Dante did not immediately concede territory and power. When Dante discovered the extent of the threats, his fury was immediate and terrible. Helena saw, for the first time, the man that the entire city feared, the ruthless, calculating crime boss who had built his immense empire upon a foundation of instilled respect and pure fear. He immediately gathered his most trusted men and prepared for a violent conflict that would last 3 brutal days and leave the city's underworld reeling. Helena was effectively barricaded inside the apartment, protected by a personal guard of 6 heavily armed men, listening to the wailing sirens in the distance and agonizing over whether Dante would ever return alive. When Dante finally walked back through the door, he was covered in blood that was not his own, his eyes carrying a terrifying, ancient weight that hadn't been there before. Helena asked no questions. She simply guided him into the bathroom and wordlessly helped him wash, her hands trembling as she gently cleansed superficial cuts and deep abrasions. "It is over," he stated, his voice a raw, sandpaper rasp. "They will not threaten you again. No one will." I made certain the message was absolutely clear. Helena knew what that meant. She understood he had done unspeakable things to ensure their safety. A small, moral part of her wanted to be horrified, wanted to recoil from the violent, unforgiving man he was. But the larger, more pragmatic part of her, the part that had witnessed the raw, brutal reality of survival on the streets, understood that sometimes violence was the necessary tool required to protect what you deeply loved. And she loved Dante with every single damaged fiber of her being. 3 months after the pivotal second kiss that had changed everything, Dante asked Helena a question she had never truly expected to hear. They were standing on the same small balcony where they had shared that transformative embrace, the city lights glittering below, Isabella sleeping soundly inside. "Helena," he began, his usually commanding voice unusually shaky and nervous. "I know our story started in an impossible way. I know I am the last kind of man who should be asking this, but these months with you and Isabella, They have been the best of my entire life. You both have shown me that real goodness exists in the world, that I can be more than the monster everyone expects me to be. He knelt down carefully, pulling a small, unadorned box from his pocket. Marry me, not because you owe me anything, not because you need my protection, but because you choose to stay just as I choose to stay with you permanently. Let me be the father Isabella deserves, the partner you deserve. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that that kiss on the street wasn't just a performance, but the true beginning of something profoundly real. Helena looked at the simple, beautiful ring, then up into Dante's intense eyes, which were filled with a mixture of raw hope and deep, abiding fear. She thought about everything they had navigated together, how he had rescued her. Not just physically, but emotionally. She thought about how he treated Isabella like his own, with genuine love, patience, and fierce pride. She thought about how, despite all his power and danger, he was gentle with her in ways no other man had ever been. And she thought of her own battered heart, which had been broken so many times, but was now beating strong and full of hope for the first time in years. Yes, she said simply, tears of pure happiness streaming down her face. Yes, I will marry you, Dante Moreira. Not because you saved me, but because you love me when you had every reason not to. Because you looked at me and saw value where everyone else only saw disposable garbage. And because when I am with you, I finally, truly feel like I am home. If you have stayed with this deeply emotional story until this point, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and leave your like. Every single action helps us continue bringing you stories that touch the heart and demonstrate that even in the darkest, most unexpected moments, love can miraculously bloom. The wedding took place 6 months later, a small, fiercely intimate ceremony attended only by their closest chosen family and friends. Isabella served as the flower girl, wearing a crisp white dress and carrying a small bouquet with a grin so wide it lit up the entire room. Helena wore a simple, elegant gown, her hair finally thick and healthy after months of proper nourishment and care. When Dante saw her walking down the short aisle toward him, his formidable eyes welled up with tears that he made no attempt to conceal. This was the family he never believed he would have, the redemption he was certain he didn't deserve. And as they exchanged their vows, promising love and unwavering loyalty, they both knew those words were not empty platitudes, but were sealed by everything they had fiercely fought through together. The three women who had inadvertently triggered this entire sequence of events eventually came to understand the profound human cost of what they had forfeited on that rainy day. Patricia, especially, carried the crushing weight of her regret like a cold stone in her chest. She had lost everything, her business, her social standing, her friendships, all for a few minutes of gratuitous, petty cruelty. She tried desperately to seek redemption, donating vast sums to charities that helped the homeless, volunteering relentlessly at women's shelters, but nothing seemed sufficient to erase the memory of the woman she had humiliated out of pure, sadist pleasure. Fernanda and Claudia followed similarly humbling paths, learning too late that kindness and genuine empathy were far more valuable assets than any designer handbag. 3 years later, Patricia finally mustered the immense courage to seek Helena out. She found Helena at a local shelter where she was volunteering, serving warm meals to a homeless family. Patricia waited until Helena had a free moment, then approached her with hesitant, unsure steps. Helena recognized her immediately, but there was no spark of anger in her eyes, only quiet curiosity. Patricia began to speak, her words stumbling over themselves in her haste to convey everything she had kept bottled up for years. She apologized in every conceivable way. She explained how that single, terrible day had not only destroyed her life, but had also violently forced her to confront the monster she had become. She spoke of the hard, transformative work she had done to redeem herself, of the sleepless nights spent agonizing over the woman and child she had so carelessly shamed. When she finished, she was sobbing uncontrollably, years of guilt and remorse finally released in bitter tears. Helena remained silent for a long moment, simply observing the broken woman standing before her. Then, surprising both of them, she slowly extended her hand and gently touched Patricia's shoulder. "I forgive you," Helena said simply, her voice soft but firm. "Not because what you did was acceptable, because it absolutely was not, but because carrying hatred only truly damages the person who carries it. And because I genuinely see that you have changed, that you used that terrible moment to become a better person. That takes courage, Patricia, more courage than most people ever manage to find." Patricia fell into Helena's embracing arms, weeping with relief and overwhelming gratitude, and Helena hugged her back firmly. Two women who had been adversaries were now connected by mutual forgiveness and profound personal growth. It was a moment of deep, cleansing healing for both of them, the closing of a painful chapter and the determined opening of a new one, marked by true redemption and resilient hope. Helena and Dante had two more children in the following years, twins named Lucas and Laura, who grew up in a household overflowing with unconditional love, clear boundaries, and unwavering understanding. Isabella blossomed into a strong, compassionate young woman, dedicating her life to helping others in the exact way her mother had modeled. She never forgot her origins, never allowed the privilege of growing up in a wealthy, powerful family to disconnect her from the harsh reality of those who still struggled. Dante aged gracefully, his temples turning silver, but his eyes retaining the fierce, magnetic intensity that had first captured Helena. He was still profoundly respected, still wielded immense power, but he now used that power primarily to build rather than destroy, to fiercely protect rather than threaten. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Helena and Dante returned to the very street where everything had begun. The boutique was long closed, replaced by a thriving community center that Helena had helped establish. They stood there for a long time, hand in hand, remembering the rainy day that had changed their trajectory. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is all real," Helena confessed, leaning her head against Dante's shoulder. "That from such a horrible moment, so much good could be born. That kiss wasn't just a gesture. It was the start of the life I always wanted but never truly believed I deserved." Dante gently kissed the top of her head. "You always deserved it," he whispered. "I was simply lucky enough to be in the right place, at the exact right moment, to realize what everyone else was too blind to see." The story of Helena and Dante spread far beyond the confines of their city, inspiring countless people who heard about the improbable romance between a feared mafia boss and a homeless single mother. Books were written, documentaries were filmed, but nothing truly captured the profound essence of what they had built together. It was more than just a story of salvation or a simple romance. It was about human dignity, about seeing inherent value where others only saw something to discard, about actively choosing love over rigid judgment. It was about two people, broken by their own harrowing journeys, finding complete healing in one another, about a family created by fierce choice rather than mere blood relation, and about redemption being possible for anyone willing to put in the necessary, agonizing work. And above all, it was about hope, about how a single, spontaneous moment of pure kindness in a cruel world could fundamentally change absolutely everything. Now, at the end of this emotional journey, I want to thank you for having listened to this story until the very end. If it touched your heart in some way, if it made you reflect on how you treat others or on your own capacity for resilience and love, then it has served its purpose. Please, subscribe to the channel for more stories that celebrate the immense strength of the human spirit. Share this video so more people can be inspired by Helena and Dante's unlikely journey. Leave a like to help us reach more people who need to hear that no matter how dark the night may become, there is always the possibility of a new, glorious dawn. And remember, in a world where you can choose to be anything, choose to be kind. You never know when your kindness might be the kiss that changes someone's life forever.
My flat sings vipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note, a piece of me, forever here in harmony. My flood sings vipers to the sky. Melodies flows gentle and free, carrying dreams across the sea. In every note, a piece of me, forever here in harmony. Music lives inside my heart. Music lives inside my heart.